Many people ask me, as I've been traveling around, specifically, what does the Americans with Disabilities Act mean? And the best answer that I have is this. Do all of you here need these chairs? Do you need to sit? Why don't you just stand up for 2 hours? You need the chairs? Oh, poor you. Do you need this platform up here for me to stand on? You really need this platform? Poor you. I have to stand here so you can see me better? Oh, poor you. Do you need these steps to get up to the platform over there or over there? Why don't you just take those steps away? Just jump up on the stage. You need those steps to the platform. Well, I'm telling you, steps and ramps are no different. Chairs are no different from using a wheelchair. Now, in the past, before the ADA was passed, we had to ask, please, I need an interpreter. I need a ramp. Begging. What the ADA says is no more need, no more begging. It is now time to change from a need to a right and a responsibility.
That was Robert Mather, an American lawyer here in Bristol, talking about the Americans with Disabilities Act. You'll be hearing more from him later in the programme, because today we're going to be looking at what happens in the States and how it happened. Two of the major deaf organisations working for equal rights for deaf and hard of hearing people, the RNID and the BDA, who, having been at the forefront of campaigning for legislation, have now gone a step further. They've organised an anti-discrimination roadshow, which visited 4 major cities in the UK. Firstly London, then Glasgow, Manchester, and tonight here in Bristol. As Robert's talk is very much about why the Act was necessary in America and how it was achieved, we took the opportunity of talking to Robert earlier today about the differences it has made. Over breakfast in his hotel, we talked about his first impressions about Britain without the Act.
Well, I was really excited to come to Britain, and when I got here, there was no text telephone at the airport. I had to look around and couldn't find one, and I thought, oh, all right, fine. I got to the hotel. There was no text telephone. Right? A friend brought me to the hotel, and they actually had to bring a decoder for the television, a text telephone, so I had to rely on a friend to provide me with these things. I shouldn't have to do that. Right? They had to go off somewhere, get this equipment, bring it all, say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. In America, you don't have to do it.
Now that the ADA has been passed, has life improved for deaf people in America?
Yes, there's a big difference. Before ADA was passed, you had to ask for an interpreter. You had to ask, please, can I have a text telephone? Please, can I have Palantite provision, whatever. And you were embarrassed. You have to ask, oh, I need an interpreter, please. Oh, I need a flashing doorbell light. Now that's all changed. Now it's no more need, it's a right. Right? We feel good to be Americans. When you go to a hotel, you go into a hotel, you let the manager know, right? Could you provide me with a text telephone, a flashing light on the door, could you please provide me with subtitled television? And it's part of a regular business, right? Those are not special things.
Okay, before the ADA was actually passed, who was actually involved in campaigning for the implementation of that law? It must have been very powerful people.
Right, we really had, it was a joint effort. We really had to involve all different groups. Deaf people, blind people, people who use wheelchairs. They all have different needs. They all have different requirements, that's true. But it was learning from each other, learning how we can agree, learning to agree to disagree. We have disagreements, that's fine, but we have to learn to work together, right? There are millions and millions of senior citizens. They have disabilities. Include senior citizens in the campaign.
It's very important.
Include people that are fighting for gender rights. Include people that are fighting for rights for racial groups. It's important to work together. You've got to work together. It becomes very, very powerful lobby if you can do that.
Now, we in this country know of the ADA and that the fact that the bill has been passed. But what are the main points within the Act?
Right. ADA has been fantastic legislation, and it's actually based on 4 principles. One is you cannot discriminate on the basis of disability in employment. Now, federal and state governments is the second area that's covered. They have to be accessible to all people with disabilities. So you can't discriminate against people with disabilities in any state or federal project. Businesses, hotels, hospitals and so on are not allowed to discriminate on the basis of disability. And the 4th area covers telecommunications, relay services. All states must provide relay services as part of their regular business.
Well, from what Robert was saying, it seems so simple over there in America. So what lessons can we learn from the American experience? Because this year has not been a good one for deaf and disabled people. There's been a lot of disappointment. For some time now, we've been excited by the thought that there was a possibility that the bill introduced by Roger Berry, which would give us some civil rights similar to those which disabled people have in the United States, would be passed by Parliament. But it was not to be. Despite all our efforts over the past year, and a mass demonstration only 3 days before the bill was to have its second reading debated, the bill was talked out of Parliament by the Minister for Disabled People himself.
The bottom line, Mr. Deputy Speaker, has always been that the government cannot accept this bill because of the very considerable cost implications involved.
We want what you got! We want what you got!
In Whitehall, direct action by the disabled, action that stopped the traffic. Their demand, equal civil rights. Intensely angered by what they see as government wrecking tactics over the Civil Rights Disabled Persons Bill, they claimed they could do nothing else.
We've done everything in the democratic way, and now we've got to take civil disobedience to get our rights.
Some handcuffed themselves to buses to highlight the issue of public transport accessibility. Others simply got out of their wheelchairs. The police tried to avoid arrests, but needed wire cutters to deal with some people.
Disabled people have a right to be furious at the government's tactics. Roger Berry, who tried to move the bill through Parliament, was disgusted and appalled at the misuse of parliamentary privileges. And he has a few strong words to say to the audience about the minister's conduct.
I'm angry that the Civil Rights Bill has been blocked by the use of parliamentary procedures, by frankly dishonest and deceitful measures, by dishonourable people. But at the same time, I'm very encouraged that the campaign for civil rights has achieved a massive momentum. Can I just say two things? Can I say, first of all, the extent of support for the Civil Rights Bill is, I think, quite astonishing. Clearly, there are millions of people up and down the country who support the simple idea that there should be a law to protect disabled people from discrimination. I've had letter after letter, phone call after phone call. We all know, it's very obvious, that people in this country want this bill on the statute book. We have not only won every argument on the bill, we have won every single vote that we've been allowed to have. When we had the first major debate on the Civil Rights Bill in March, we won the vote by 231 to 0. And when the bill went into committee, there wasn't a single vote against any one of the clauses. And I insisted that we debated every single clause, and the minister sat there and did not oppose a single clause in the bill. So it was left to the wrecking tactics with which you'll be familiar to see the bill go down. And I have to say, in one sense, that had to be done because the arguments on the part of our opponents had been lost. First of all, we were told, of course, education and persuasion will work. The familiar story. Whenever people campaign against discrimination of any kind, we're always told, no, you can't legislate, just leave it to education and persuasion. And yet, of course, if education and persuasion worked, then we wouldn't have the discrimination that we're fighting. We're then told, of course, yes, okay, but the law can't be used. Legislation cannot work. We refer to the experience in the United States. We refer to the fact that the Law Society in this country fully supports the Civil Rights Bill. The House of Lords supports the Civil Rights Bill. I might say there are more lawyers per square inch in the House of Lords than just about anywhere else in the country. They support the Civil Rights Bill. And the third argument that was trotted out against the bill was, of course, this is going to impose undue regulation on people. And the government said, we want deregulation, not more regulation. Well, I find it difficult to think of anything that regulates people's lives more than them being stopped from working because they're denied work because they are disabled, or anything that regulates people's lives more than them being barred from buildings, barred from public life because they may have a disability. We are talking here about liberating people. We're talking about deregulating people's lives. In conclusion, Chair, I have no doubt whatever that the Civil Rights Bill or something very like it will reach the statute book. In 10 years' time, we'll look back and wonder how on earth it could be possible that in 1994 we had to debate this issue. How it could be that some could oppose a bill that sought only to guarantee equal rights. Discrimination is unacceptable. There ought to be a law against it, and if this bill gets through eventually, there will be a law against it. Thank you very much.
That's great. It's good to know that we have such support in Parliament. And don't be disappointed. I know that we have not heard the last of the bill. The issues will continue to be raised. But things didn't happen overnight in the States. Our next clip shows Bob recording his time as a freshman when he was training to be a lawyer. The attitudes of both the lecturer and his classmates was intriguing. And remember, this was something that happened over 20 years ago.
In 1977, at that time, there was no ADA. There was no law prohibiting discrimination in schools. And I decided to go to law school and see if I could do it. Law school itself had offered a course in trial practice, and I thought, well, why not take that class? I'd rather make mistakes in a school classroom, in a fake jury room, let's say, than in the real thing. So I signed up for the class. I sat in the front there with my interpreter, and the professor came in, of course, and was shocked to see me sitting there with the interpreter. And some students looked upset as well. So the professor looks at me, and he said, maybe I should tell you the name of this class. It is trial practice. If you're in the wrong room, please leave. And looked at me, and I sat. Well, my first mock case, there were 12 mock jurors in the box, and the opposing attorney was there, and I was signing away. Now, the opposing attorney had a hard time getting people's attention. When I signed, the jurors watched me, and when the opposing attorney signed, the jurors watched the interpreter. It's not my problem. Now, the 12 jurors watched me with this kind of a funny smile like this. You know, and I noticed there was something funny about it. I really didn't know why. So I won my first case. I felt great. I went home and took my jacket off. Totally ripped under the pits, both arms. Now, I don't want to see that kind of smile again, so I'm taking it off. Now, Congress spent some time on the name of this law, the Americans with Disabilities Act. No more the Handicapped Act, the Disabled Americans. The message sent the wrong message. And Congress wanted to make it clear that millions of Americans suffered discrimination on the basis of disability, not, oh, the disabled suffered discrimination or the handicapped faced discrimination. We were talking about millions of Americans first who happen to have disabilities. No different from us. You don't see yourself, oh, as a female attorney, or in America as an African American attorney. We see people first. We are Americans first. We happen to have disabilities. Of course, I am proud to see myself as a deaf person. There's no question about that. Don't misunderstand me. But I don't want hearing people to look at me and say, oh, he's a deaf lawyer. Isn't that wonderful? I don't like that attitude. I'm an attorney who's professional and happens to be deaf. That's no different from you. Some of you might be a deaf teacher or a deaf contractor. You want to be seen as a professional contractor. We want to be treated with respect as Americans. It is not an economic issue. The attitude must be changed. When the ADA was passed, many employers and companies were very nervous. They were saying, well, what does it mean? The ADA and rights and new concepts and new responsibilities. One story is of a man who had a limited use of his upper arms. He couldn't lift them up. He asked his supervisor, well, I'd like a reasonable accommodation. Now that ADA has been passed, I'd like to have those changes made in my job area. And the supervisor said, well, I'm not really sure how to respond. They didn't want to say the wrong thing. So the supervisor went up to his manager, and he tells his manager, well, one of my workers asked for a reasonable accommodation. What should I do? I don't want a lawsuit. The manager got upset, and the manager went up to the president's office. And the president's response was, oh, no, I don't want to get a fine. I don't want lawsuits. You know, what are our rights and responsibilities? And was really nervous and panicky. So they thought, well, why don't we hire an attorney who specializes in the ADA? So the attorney, of course, is from out of town. They call him to fly in. The attorney comes into the president's office, and the president says, well, what are my responsibilities under the ADA? What does it mean by reasonable accommodation? I mean, what is an undue hardship? I mean, I don't want to pay a fine. I don't want lawsuits. And the lawyer says, well, hold on a minute. I'd like to know exactly what did that employee ask for reasonable accommodation. Well, the president said, well, that's my question. I mean, I want to know the meaning of those things. The attorney said, no, I want to know what did the employee ask for. So the attorney said, well, hold on a second. Let's call in the manager. Now, the supervisor. And the supervisor looked really upset. He thought he was in trouble. Now, the attorney said, now, don't worry, but I heard that your employee wants a reasonable accommodation. What did he want? Supervisor said, well, I don't really know what he wants. And the attorney said, do you know what he really wanted for his reasonable accommodation? And so they went down to the supervisor's office, and they just didn't know what he wanted. So they decided to go down to the workers' area. So all these people go down to the workers' area, and here's this big surprise that they all came down. Now the attorney says, I understand that you asked for reasonable accommodation. And the worker said, yes, I asked my supervisor for a reasonable accommodation. He told me to wait, and I've been waiting. And I tried to tell my supervisor, but he told me to wait, and I've been waiting for a long time. The attorney said, so what do you want? And the worker said, well, I wanted my supervisor to lower this shelf in my work area so I could raise my arms. The shelf's too high. The attorney looked at the rest of the group and said, there's the answer to your question. If you work with Dr. Berry, it's important to remember that you're asking simply for access, no different than others. That the law itself is a pro-business act. When businesses complained about the cost for interpreting services and text telephones, when businesses have found out what benefits are there for their businesses, that it helps their business to grow. Now, one business thought about buying a text telephone, and he wondered if spending the $200 or $300 for a text telephone would be worth it. He advertised around the community that he had a text telephone, and he found lots, to his surprise, of callers, called for pizzas, and paid off that text telephone because of all those calls. He didn't realize that he could have gotten as many calls, and more than he did before. One other story was a restaurant owner who said, well, why do I have to install a ramp? Because remember, the law requires a ramp if it can be done without great difficulty. And if it can be done, the ramp is required to be installed. Now, managers said, well, I have to pay for this ramp. Well, I've been here for 20 years. I haven't seen anybody with a wheelchair. Well, of course not. They know they can't get in. So he installed a ramp, and to his surprise, more people came with their friends and their relatives who didn't use chairs. The businesses did not realize that the ADA was really a pro-business act. The point is that the ADA is not really a cost issue. It's not really a cost issue. Our experience has shown that it does work. It's a civil right. It's not a cost issue. It's not an economic issue.
There were quite a number of questions from the floor. and they reflected the great interest of both deaf and hearing people in the successful passing of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Unfortunately, there's no time to cover the questions in this programme, but what we can do is reflect on Robert Mather's talk. What did the audience think of it?
This evening's meeting, I found it really inspiring. Recharged the batteries after the disastrous goings-on in Parliament recently. I was really interested to hear how the ADA is working in America, and I can see lots of parallels to what we could do here.
Well, I feel that what's been said about cost is really interesting because regardless of cost, money is not the issue. I now realise just how important the ADA is. It's just hit me. Until now, I didn't really understand what civil rights was all about. But learning about ADA has changed that. And I've learnt that it's not an economic issue, but a human issue. I feel very strongly that I'm seen as a person first and not as disabled. I don't see myself as disabled, but as a deaf individual. But more importantly, with a deaf identity first and foremost. I agree with him.
Well, the meeting is now over, and people are off home with a lot to think about. Because, after all, in 1992, the ADA was implemented in America, and this is the last roadshow talking about that legislation. People have taken on board the information and the confidence to continue campaigning to achieve legislation here in Britain. The issues will continue to be debated, and See Here will keep you up to date in the new series. Okay, bye-bye.